Dr. Kevin Roberts runs the premier conservative think tank in Washington, a group that's committed to helping Americans live the good life. The Heritage Foundation proposes sound policy and model legislation that puts power in the hands of everyday Americans. Would you please welcome the president of the Heritage Foundation and Heritage Action for America, Dr. Kevin Roberts. You know, the Heritage Foundation has such a wonderful history. It was started back during the time of Ronald Reagan as a way to get policy that could be adopted into legislation. But to put it in a think tank meant that people could be a little independent of all the politics of it and focus on, would it work? Would it be helpful? So it's quite an extraordinary organization that you get to be part of and lead today.
It's a great privilege. We've been around 51 years, and even though we're non-sectarian, almost every one of us at Heritage has a very deep Christian or Jewish faith. And I think in addition to the point that you make about our independence from the politics, especially given the contrast that we have right now, as you like to say, Governor, between up and down, bringing that voice to Washington, D.C. at this time of really hyper-secularism, at least for me as a man of very deep faith, married nearly 30 years, 4 kids, 11 years of homeschooling, being in D.C. at this time, the only way that I think we can be cheerful about the work that we do is because of our faith, but also because we are in Washington, but not of Washington. And I think that's really crucial.
I love the way you put that, and I think it's probably a very apt description of Heritage. I remember through the years when I was governor, we would sometimes find excellent ideas that would come from Heritage. Things that would be involving school choice, it might be involving healthcare options that really empowered private sector capacity, more choice for the consumer, just a host of issues around the gamut. But this year, Heritage has been labeled as sort of the bad guys because of—
I've noticed that.
Yeah, you know, and I'm going to get to that because Project 2025 is a Heritage Foundation product. The press has said, oh, this is Donald Trump's thing. It's like, what, 700 pages or something like that?
922.
922 to be exact. So it's a lengthy thing. And they obviously would excerpt little pieces out, the press would, and the Democrats, and say, oh, look, this is what Trump said. Trump came out and disavowed, said, look, this isn't my platform. I didn't write it. I wasn't the one that put it out there. But they still say that it's his. Let's give your side of it. What is Project 2025, and why, Kevin, is it so dangerous?
Well, this is something that we've done at Heritage since 1980. As you know, Governor, we were called Reagan's think tank, not because Reagan took every policy proposal we ever offered or every personnel recommendation we made, but because there was a certain synergy there. But we exist in the policy lane. President Trump, any conservative candidate, even though we might have some ideological synergy, exists in the political lane. So it just by definition, because of our work, is going to be candidate agnostic. But what this project is, and I think it gets into why the left has turned it into the boogeyman this season, is that we've taken policies, in the 922 pages, we've also recruited nearly 20,000 people into a personnel database. Now, whether those people are hired by the president, the vice president, cabinet secretaries is 100% up to them. You know as well, we don't operate with any presumption, going back to our opening exchange about our faith, even in a non-sectarian organization. We exist to be in service to the American people. But I'll also mention this about Project 2025. The left doesn't yet understand that personnel database isn't going anywhere. Because I've had a half dozen governors, as you would appreciate, come to me and say, Kevin, when all this blows over, we would love some recommendations from these 110 organizations who've come together to do this, but it's never been done on this scale. And we've got 110 groups that are part of it. We have 20,000 people in this database. And frankly, what we were trying to do is insert some policy conversation into a political discourse that frankly has been kind of vacuous. I dare say we succeeded in doing that. We don't look for that kind of attention, and next time around, figuratively speaking, when the left does this kind of attack, we will, of course, correct the record. And one of the reasons that it is such a narrow path forward is because the radical left has taken over nearly every institution in this country, namely, and most importantly, the administrative state in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
So just to put it bluntly, there's no way that we have any hope in this life of taking back power from Washington, devolving that power from Washington, giving it back to the American people, to governors, to states, if we don't first attack the power that's been accrued in Washington. You have to have people who have the experience, who have the virtue, frankly, who have the spine to withstand all of the attacks that the left is going to assail them with. Ultimately, it's up to the boss, right?
Yeah.
The president, the vice president, the governor. We know that. We operate in that service. But I'll also tell you this, Governor, we're not going to roll over.
Good.
We care too much about this country. We love this country. And there have been far too many Americans who've said, we're inspired by what you want to do. Keep fighting for us, because there aren't enough people in Washington who do.
Kevin, before we were talking about the administrative state. Some people will call it the deep state, but it is the uniparty, the donor class run Washington, D.C. cabal. I mean, I think a lot of us recognize, if we've ever dealt with it, that that's really the problem. It is a deeply rooted problem. Give us some specific things that Heritage has maybe identified that need to change in Washington that could bring power back to the people and away from a handful of donors and a handful of powerful corporate interests who don't really care about the rest of us.
Boy, how much time do we have? We have 922 pages of ideas, but starting with a couple that are really important. The first and most important, and it's the one thing, Governor, that the radical left gets right in its mischaracterizations of Project 2025, is that we do want to end, once and for all, the U.S. Department of Education.
Yes, good.
Like you, I'm a public school guy from the Deep South. I'm also a fifth-generation educator. I care very deeply about the most noble ideal that we've ever had in this country, which is that we promise every child, regardless of their background in this pluralistic country, equal access to the greatest education in the history of man. We're not doing that because of the Department of Education, but think about the link between the poor education that we're providing and the ability of elites in Washington, frankly, to lie to us. And it would be better if it was just Democrats who were doing this. But I can tell you from my 3 years of experience in D.C., it's far too many Republicans.
Yeah.
But the second thing we need to do, if you think about what the Chinese Communist Party poses as the greatest existential threat to us, I think, in certainly our lifetimes, we need to end once and for all that you can be a lobbying firm on K Street and lobby for the CCP against our interests.
Absolutely. That shouldn't be hard to stop. I mean, it's hard for me to believe that that's even tolerated.
And third, thinking about the importance of this tragedy of illegal immigration to this country, which isn't just about breaking the rule of law at the southern border. It isn't just about receiving benefits from a very generous people. It's the signal that that sends. But to your point about the uniparty, there are Republicans who haven't been vocal enough about this. Now, thankfully, the vast majority of them are. I want to be really clear. But if you gave me a policy magic wand, and I was able to use that for one change on the first day of a conservative administration, we would close the southern border, we would end benefits for illegal aliens, and through self-deportation, they would go back home.
And I think that most Americans, in fact, there's an overwhelming majority, both Republican and Democrat, who agree with that. That's really one of those issues. It's not horizontal, it is vertical. And that's why I don't understand why the political people of Washington don't join together and say, this is crazy. We can't have a country if you don't have a border, if you don't know who's here. This election, we always say every year, every election, most important one in our lifetime. Kevin, I really believe this is by far the most important one, because the difference between the candidates and where they will take this country, so very different. What would be the greatest fear you have if Kamala Harris is elected, and the greatest hope you would have if Donald Trump is elected?
My greatest fear if the vice president is elected president is that we lose our religious liberty. I started a K-12 Christian school in South Louisiana. I led a Christian college, which decided under my leadership to tell the Department of Education to keep its federal student loans and grants so that we could continue our religious mission. That was 10 years ago, Mike. And fast forward, I never would have imagined, even in my lifetime, that we would see the radical left explicitly say that if they're back in power, your ability to worship however you would like, mine and my family's, is gone. That's what's going to happen. And as I tell agnostic and atheist friends, I have a few remaining, in spite of my faith, that if they come after our religious liberty, they're going to come after everything.
Yeah.
And the Democrat vice president and governor of Minnesota are explicit about that. Now, I'm supernaturally hopeful. I'm also hopeful in this life because I trust the American people, as Ronald Reagan would remind us. And I think what both Mr. Trump and Mr. Vance have offered in their own policy achievements is a revitalizing of the American dream. And they have different personalities. They might say things in a different way than I would as a policy leader, although I admire them. And I will say that the best hope that I have for this country, if they happen to prevail in terms of policy, from education to immigration to the economy, is that Americans are going to wake up a year, 2 years, 5 years later and say, boy, we hit a really low point at the beginning of the 2020s, but we're taking our country back and we believe in the American dream.
What a great, great analysis. I hope people take that seriously. Kevin, thank you for joining us here tonight. If you want to learn more about the work of the Heritage Foundation, what they're doing, find out more about his upcoming book. It's going to be released next month called Dawn's Early Light. You can go to Dr. Roberts' guest page at Huckabee.tv, find out how to get the book. And you can also even find out how to read for yourself Project 2025 and see if it's as scary as Kamala Harris thinks it is.